Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. In the middle of a sea of clouds on the mountain peak, when the path ahead disappeared into the cold mist, Toan made a promise to give Tu Diem a better future, a moment that silenced her fears and changed everything between them. Will that promise be strong enough to carry them through uncertain days and lead them to a place they can truly call home? Now let's discover the story of Toan and Tu Diem together. And if you enjoy it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos. Early spring morning arrived under a thin layer of mist, still hanging on the low branches. Soft sunlight leaned across the mountainside and touched the wet leaves, making the remaining drops of water glow for a moment before disappearing. The stone path that led upward was still damp and slightly slippery in places. The air was cool and clean, enough for every breath to feel clear inside the chest. They started from the foot of the slope, walking slowly with an even rhythm. Peach blossoms stretched along both sides of the trail. Petals drifted down onto their shoulders, settled in their hair, and slid across the ground when the wind passed. Sweat appeared on Tu Diem's forehead, yet her eyes kept lifting toward the branches, moving gently above. Each time she paused to breathe, she looked around as if trying to keep every detail in her memory. Toan stopped at a small wooden stall by the path. He paid for the entrance tickets, received the thin paper slip, and turned back immediately. Without saying anything more, he reached for her hand, and they continued. The gesture was familiar but steady, the kind that removed hesitation without needing words. Below them, the valley began to fill with clouds. The small rooftops of the village slowly faded behind the rising white layers. Tu Diem laughed and pointed into the changing space beneath them. The view made her forget the ache in her legs. Toan followed her gaze, his expression softening. Their steps kept the same pace. Each step carried weight, but it was stable. It felt like crossing a quiet line between the past and something clearer ahead. The wind carried the scent of peach blossoms, damp soil, and new leaves. The openness of the landscape made every worry feel smaller. Green mountain ranges stacked into the distance, their color fading with space. Sunlight broke through the clouds in long beams and fell across the path they were sharing. Neither of them spoke about it, yet both understood that being there together mattered more than the climb itself. At the highest point, the white clouds rose faster. The wind grew sharper and colder. Tu Diem moved closer and lightly held his sleeve. Toan turned and looked at her for a long time before speaking. His voice stayed low and steady. He wanted her life to be better. He wanted to make up for what had been missing before. He wanted her days ahead to feel stable and calm. He did not rush the words. She answered only with a small nod. Her eyes were wet, but she did not cry. Fog closed around them and erased the path ahead. No other people were visible. The space belonged only to the two of them. Memories of Ta Jua returned. The same thick clouds, the same feeling of losing direction, the same way they had always found each other again. He told her to put on her jacket. The cold wind numbed their fingers quickly, yet when his hand closed around hers, the warmth spread outward. They stood still for a long time. No more sentences were needed. The bond between them felt clearer than any spoken promise. When the clouds drifted aside, the silence deepened. The sound of the wind, the movement of leaves, and their own breathing became sharper. Time seemed to slow. The past no longer felt heavy. The future moved closer. Farther down the trail, oars clung tightly to large tree trunks. The peach blossoms had fallen away, replaced by small green fruit. Toan guided Tu Diem toward a wide rock that opened the view over the distant village. They tried the swing tied to a thick branch. She held the ropes firmly, but after only a few turns, dizziness forced her to stop. She asked in a quiet voice. He moved quickly to help her down, smiling gently as he reassured her. They sat together on a heart-shaped rock. The wind cooled the sweat on their backs. She looked toward a stall where bright ethnic dresses hung in rows, shining in the sunlight. She shook her head. Not now. They would wait until everything was more stable. Toan nodded. To him, she was already the most beautiful. Being peaceful beside each other was enough. He used a cloth to wipe the sweat from her forehead and reminded her to walk slowly on the way down. Small actions, repeated without effort. They spoke more clearly than any declaration. Sunlight filtered through the leaves and moved across their faces. The valley below remained wrapped in mist, like a still painting. Under a large tree, Toan returned with a bag of seasoned mango and 2 bottles of water. He opened the bag and offered her the first piece. The sour taste made her wince and then laugh. She said sweetness or sourness depended on the person you shared it with. He pretended to be offended, but his eyes were bright. They ate slowly, one small piece at a time. The atmosphere lightened. In the middle of their quiet conversation, he mentioned the afternoon plan. They would visit Thu's mother to give New Year greetings and bring a full gift basket. Tu Diem nodded. The thought of sitting at a family meal warmed her expression immediately. Between the sour mango, the salt of sweat, and the cool wind at that height, a deep sense of peace formed. No large promises were spoken. He wiped the corner of her mouth. She opened a bottle and handed it back to him. Clouds moved slowly in the distance, as if pausing to watch. She looked at him for a long time. One simple thought settled inside her. If he is happy, then I am happy. Sunlight broke into small shapes across the ground. Leaves moved softly overhead. Time seemed to slow to hold the moment in place. The descent was harder than the climb. Her legs ached and her knees trembled with each step. Toan stopped and knelt in front of her. He told her to climb onto his back. She hesitated for a few seconds, then wrapped her arms around his neck. He stood and walked with steady steps. His breathing remained even despite the long slope. The wind carried dust from the road. On his back, she felt completely safe. She rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes for a while. They stopped at Tufan's farm. The gate was closed and everything inside was quiet. Toan bought a Tet gift basket from a nearby stall and continued. She stayed on his back. Gratitude filled her chest. Carrying her was not only about easing her fatigue, it was the way he kept the promise he had spoken on the peak. The long slope ahead looked like future difficulties, yet his steps remained firm and even. When he set her down, he smiled, tired but light. She looked at him for a long moment. He was always there. The mountain ranges slowly moved behind them. The road leading toward the houses became clearer. Afternoon sunlight leaned across the path. Their shadows stretched on the ground. Their steps were slow but certain. The feeling of exhaustion had disappeared. Only trust kept growing with each step forward. The path from the foot of the mountain toward Thu's mother's house became clearer as the afternoon light softened. The cold air faded, replaced by the faint smell of cooking smoke drifting through the village. Voices, the sound of chickens and the clatter of dishes carried out from the low houses standing close together. They slowed down at the gate. Toan adjusted the handle of the gift basket and brushed the dust from his shoulder. Tu Diem smoothed her hair, glanced at her dirt-stained shoes, and smiled quietly. The long journey still lingered in their bodies, but the fatigue had given way to anticipation. The door opened and warmth flowed outward together with the aroma of sticky rice cakes, pickled shallots, and braised chicken. Thu's mother stepped out to welcome them, her eyes lighting up immediately. New Year greetings were exchanged in slow, clear voices. Toan presented the gift basket with both hands. Tu Diem bowed politely. They pulled inside at once. Inside, the table had already been set. Tu Fan stood up in a new outfit with a bright smile. Thu poured tea while talking. The presence of everyone made the small space warmer. Bowls and chopsticks moved from hand to hand, creating the familiar rhythm of a Tet meal. Toan sat down, his back still remembering the descent, but his face relaxed. Tu Diem sat beside him, looking around as if storing every detail. Everyone raised their cups to wish for health, peace, and a smooth new year. The blessings were simple but sincere. Tu Diem and Tu Fan talked continuously, asking about the journey and the plans ahead. Laughter appeared more often. When Toan was asked, he spoke about finding stable work. His voice stayed low but firm. Thu's mother nodded and said that with effort, things would improve. The sentence settled in the room like quiet reassurance. Food kept being placed into Tu Diem's bowl. She was told to eat more and take care of herself. Tu Fan complimented her beauty. She smiled and lowered her head shyly. Each time she did, Toan looked at her without speaking, clearly content to see her at ease. Sitting at this full table after everything they had been through felt solid and real. Steam from the soup blurred the window slightly. Yellow light filled the room as evening fell. Shadows moved along the wall beside red couplets and a branch of peach blossoms. The conversation shifted toward the new year, plans, work, and what still needed to be built. Toan spoke about trying his best to take care of their future. Thu's mother listened and nodded. No long advice, only trust. After the meal, they moved to tea and sweets. Red envelopes were handed out with blessings for health and hopes for wedding news soon. The room filled with laughter. Toan and Tu Diem presented their gifts and returned the wishes. Tu Fan covered her mouth while laughing. Thu kept nodding with short, cheerful comments. Tu Diem looked around the table once more. The feeling of belonging grew stronger. After so many uncertain days, this moment felt like a pause in the right place. Every dish and every laugh made the past lighter. Toan sat beside her, pouring more tea from time to time. Their fingers touched briefly when she reached for the cup. The gesture was small but familiar. The conversation stretched into the night without anyone hurrying to leave. Stories moved from work to old memories and back to future plans. Each one like another step forward. The yellow light rested on every face. Outside, the night had fully arrived. Inside, warmth and voices remained. Shadows moved slowly across the walls. The peach branch trembled when the door opened and closed. Tu Diem watched Thu's mother divide more sweets onto a plate. A clear sense of healing formed inside her, from days of not knowing where she belonged to this moment of having a fixed seat at the table. Her presence here now felt natural. When it was time to leave, the reminders came again. Walk carefully, visit again when free. Take care. Toan lifted the lighter basket. Tu Diem said goodbye to each person with handshakes and gentle touches on the shoulder. They stepped out into the quiet night. The village road stretched under scattered lights. They walked slowly, keeping the same rhythm as on the mountain. Their shadows extended along the ground. For a while, neither of them spoke. Everything that needed to be said had remained inside. The night wind was cooler. Tu Diem moved closer. Toan leaned slightly toward her. The road ahead was not long, but each step felt clear. After a day of movement, peace existed in walking side by side. Far behind them, the light in Thu's mother's house was still on. Ahead, the road was darker but easy to follow. Trust had formed from the morning climb, the descent, and the shared meal. Each step forward continued that. Night settled completely. The sound of insects rose from the fields. They kept walking without hurry, without turning back. The road ahead opened in silence, just like their story, not loud but certain.
Toàn và Tử Diễm bắt đầu hành trình đầu xuân trên con đường núi phủ đầy hoa đào, nơi từng bước chân giúp họ rời xa những ngày cũ nhiều thiếu thốn. Giữa biển mây lạnh trên đỉnh cao, lời hứa của Toàn mở ra hy vọng về một cuộc sống ổn định. Xuống núi, những cử chỉ nhỏ như cõng nhau qua dốc dài, chia nhau miếng xoài chua và mặc áo ấm làm tình cảm thêm chắc chắn. Buổi chiều, họ mang quà đến nhà mẹ Thu, hòa vào bữa cơm Tết ấm áp với tiếng cười, lời chúc và sự đón nhận chân thành.